Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Talking Transformers, the show where I, David, talk about Transformers with somebody who likes Transformers. Now, before we get on with this week's episode featuring the fantastic Mr. Kris Carter, I want to take a little bit of time just to give you a few announcements. First of all, you might have already seen it, but the tickets are now on sale for TF Nation 2025 in August, as well as the Minicon in March. So if you fancy spending a great deal of fun and time with a lot of like-minded Transformers fans in the UK, then head over to tfnation.com for all of the information. Now, before we start, as always, I just want to give a big shout out to all of our patrons who subscribe at the Voyager class. That's Adam White, Andy Hudson, Bill Ledson, Chibu, Chris Ford, Gareth Pollock, Gordon Pecker, Hurt Spalter, Lee Trailer, Lola, Nick Snowden, Nikki, Owen Williams, Pete Willis, Richard Fieldhouse, Sam Silvermoon, Starsaber Fan 38, Stuart Cork, The Stew 13. Thank you all so much for your support. If you want to join our Patreon and get access to the full video podcast, you can go ahead and do so at patreon.com/TFNation. All of the links are down below, and if you are listening to this on Patreon, thank you so much for your continued support. It truly means a great deal to us. Now, let's talk to Mr. Carter. Are we at the point now where the chocolate has diminished, or is there still a lot of chocolate lying around?
There's a tiny bit of After Eight left.
Okay.
Just because I reached After Eight, what's the word? Overexposure? Meltdown? I don't know. Focus on some other chocolate and then come back to finish the After Eight. So yeah, but it's getting there.
I always love it that we, as a society, have figured out a way to specifically pigeonhole certain types of food to certain times of the year.
Yeah.
You know, After Eight, Christmas. Turkey, Christmas. You wouldn't turn around and say, oh, what do you fancy for your Sunday dinner in the middle of July? Turkey.
Exactly.
It doesn't happen.
It's this narrow window.
Yes.
And the same, the chocolate orange, another one that seems to be making its way into an exclusively Christmas-based chocolate stocking type Prezi, so yeah, it's all good.
I would not be in the least bit surprised if there's perhaps a Wallace and Gromit inspired Chicken Run spin-off called Turkey Run, where literally for 11 months of the year they're absolutely fine, and then 1 month of the year is just this mad dash for survival.
Yeah. I mean, like in the US it would be troublesome around Thanksgiving as well, so you've got those two different kind of brackets, but it's I'm all fed in the meantime, so that's all good to go.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it. So let's talk a little bit about Transformers, because that's what we're here to do. One of the things that I always like to do here is to, when I have invited a guest on, is to chat with them about something that they want to talk about. And you wanted to talk about sort of the joy of toys. And we have a few toys here floating around. And I think this has all stemmed from the fact that you've recently moved, so you've finally got the chance to start unpacking your toys again. Yeah.
I mean, recently, for a given value of recent, we actually moved house in October of 2022. But the house needs a lot of work, and my naive plan was within a year it would be done, and a year later it was not done. So a lot of my Transformers have been boxed up in the attic for quite a long time. So this month, or rather at the end of last month, we finally managed to get the office kind of finally decorated, and you can't see it because it's all behind the screen, but there's now something like 130, 140 Transformers around me now. And that, to me, is my current source of joy, because I haven't had them available to play around with or pose or just, futz about with for ages. I've had a couple kicking up out here and there, mainly because over the course of those 2 years, I haven't stopped buying Transformers. So all the ones that have kind of come out from like Legacy and the Earthrise and sort of the end of Kingdom, that kind of the stuff around that era is my main focus. So newer ones of those have been desk bots here and there. But now I've actually managed to finally get the bulk of my collection out and about. So there's still some that I can't put on display. I had big plans for the Titan class Transformers. I can't really fit them anywhere, so they are still attic bound. But my main guys are all hidden away out of shot, but all right here. Like I've got a couple here kicking about. So they are there. I'm not making it up. They are here. I swear. I can't move my camera and show you exactly them. But if you're listening to this without the video, then you're not going to see them anyway. So it's fine.
I like the idea where it's like, I do collect Transformers, honestly, really, but you just can't see them.
Yeah. I keep on my Transformers in another town.
In one of my other many palatial estates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's been my big joy at the moment. And I know when we first talked about doing this, and you said, to try and think of something that brings you joy within Transformers, and I was like, well, lots of different things have brought me lots of different types of joy at lots of different times. So I was trying to narrow it down, and I think like at the moment, the last couple of weeks have been spent getting stuff down from the attic. And of course, when I got them, when I moved, they were all in plastic boxes. And the best way to move Transformers is to put them into vehicle mode usually. So all my guys were in vehicle mode, and when I put them on display, I've got a couple of IKEA cabinets. They are too. When they're vehicle modes, they don't display as well as when they're in the proper posable robot modes. So I've had to transform, lots and lots of Transformers in the last couple of weeks, and that's just been great fun to get that tactile feel of taking these little toys and converting them, and I say converted, and see, I've been indoctrinated, transforming.
You have. That's it. You're not allowed to use the T word.
Towing the company line. We don't transform them. We convert them. No. We transform them. So it's just been really good fun to get these guys and to just play with them again and put them into little poses and just display them, and it's just been great fun doing that.
So I was wondering how I was going to approach this in terms of like talking about the joy of toys and stuff like that. But I thought what would be a really good idea would be sort of map the evolution of your enjoyment with toys to sort of try and pick apart exactly what it is that brings you so much joy with it. So what I want to do is I want to take us all the way back to obviously when you were a kid. When you were growing up, what was your relationship with toys like? Was it your main source of entertainment?
It's weird. Let me try to think back. So I'm technically a child of the 70s. I really snuck in under the radar. I got in there in 1979. That's when I appeared on the scene. And so when Transformers first started, they were almost my first toys. So I first got it. I was there from day one. Like I remember when in 1984. I remember when it started on TV. I remember watching it. So that was just a really good day. And then when we found out about the cartoon, found out about the toys, and just great. And before that, the only thing I was really into toys wise that I can remember were Matchbox cars, because my dad was a mechanic, and I'd see cars in his garage. And my mum would get me these little, very cheap little die-cast cars at the newsagent whenever we would go there. So when I was about sort of 3 and 4, I used to have tons and tons of these little Matchbox cars. And my game with them and that I would play, which speaks to how kind of boring and bland I really am, is I would make car parks, and my mum's living room floor would just be full of grids of cars, and I would just have all these cars organized, and my game was I would play car parks, and I would just move cars around this grid, and people would find parking spots, and that's what I would do. So that first got me, I guess, interested in like cars. But at the same time, it was at that point in the 80s when lots of cartoons were kicking off. We had stuff like like GoBots and He-Man and whatever else was coming out around that time. And Transformers really hooked its kind of talons into me because it was cars. So when I could get, and of course because at the beginning they looked like real cars. So you had Nissans, you had Porsches, you had all that kind of stuff, and real cars that looked like the little Matchbox cars that I had, but also became little robots, was just I just an incredible dopamine hit to my brain straight away, and that's what kind of got me started down that line. I think as well, something about the fun that because you almost getting two toys in one with them, that spoke in a very economical sense to my parents. So like, yes, you've got, a little car, but now you've got a little man, so you can play with us as well. So I'm sure that's what got me started on the transforming toy kind of route. And no other toys really kind of like spoke to me as much as they did. As a kid, I did collect other figures. So the other major one I collected would have been the real Ghostbusters. That's the only other kind of toy line that I really collected. I never collected Star Wars. I never collected Action Force or G.I. Joe. I did have literally I think I had 3 Joe figures because they were bought for me by people who didn't know that I'd rather Transformers.
They just didn't know.
Yeah, they just didn't know. So like I had a Cobra Eel, I think it was, a grey masked kind of like guy with flippers. He was like an underwater diver kind of guy. And I had Shipwreck. So I remember those 2 specific Joe characters. I definitely had those. But then it was also that weird thing of growing up in the 80s where all of the different friend groups that I had, we would sort of collect different toy lines each and then mix and merge them. So I had most of the Transformers. Oh no, that's not true. I had most of the Transformers within the friend group. I didn't have all the Transformers at all. But I had the most out of our friends. And 1 or 2 of the other guys had other ones. But then another friend of mine, he was well into Action Force. So, he was the one who had the big oil rig play set and planes and Destro and Cobra Commander and all the other things. But as another friend of mine, he was massively into Thundercats. So he had all the Thundercat stuff. So it was that sort of thing where between this 4 or 5 different people, we covered the bases in terms of Transformers and Thundercats and Mask and He-Man and all that kind of thing. So I got to experience all those different toys. But it was always the Transformers ones that kind of stuck out to me as the ones that were the most fun to play with.
Mm. And in terms of the Transformers, which ones as a kid were your ride or die toys? Which figures just spoke to you the most?
The very first one, the very first one I ever had was Bumblebee. So that little yellow Bumblebee toy, that was, to me, that was great because that was the one where, that was the first one. And I think the one I had after Bumblebee would have either have been Prowl or Optimus Prime. I can't remember which one it would have been. It was definitely one of those 2. So Prowl, Bumblebee, and Prime, they've always been kind of my go-tos, I guess, my mainstays. So they've always been the fun ones. And especially the Prowl, not so much the character, but the Prowl car, that Datsun or the Nissan, Fairlady Z, that police car is just so iconic to me. It's just such a long kind of sleek vehicle. It just looks great in black and white. And I always remember as a kid knowing this is quite a fragile toy because you see so many on the secondhand market or, that are just got broken canopies, that there's no roof to them. And I never broke mine. Mine was, the roof was in one bit. I didn't lose the missiles. It was all together in one bit. So yeah, so Bumblebee and Prowl were the 2 ones that were most, the ones I'm most identified with. I very rarely had, I didn't have I only ever had 1 Seeker jet. I only ever had Thrust. I never had Starscream or Thundercracker or Skywarp or any of those guys. It was only Thrust I ever had. So it was kind of those things where my parents, I couldn't justify having many remolds or repaints or anything like that. So I had Prowl, but I never had Smokescreen, never had Silver Streak, or Blue Streak rather. So I never had them. And I had Tracks. Tracks was allowed because there was no repaints of Tracks at the time, so that was good. But yeah, all the guys who got painted up multiple times, I had Inferno, never had Grapple. So it was one of those things where, I had to fight my case for Ultra Magnus because my dad was like, "You've got the truck." And I was like, no, but yeah, the white truck is the same as Prime, but the entire trailer, all that's different, and I need to have this toy. So I managed to fight my case occasionally.
I feel like that's a universal constant, isn't it,
Yeah,
for anybody and their parents. I always remember with growing up trying to convince them that Street Fighter 2 Turbo was a fundamentally different game to Street Fighter 2. But
yeah.
you already have Street Fighter 2. Yes, but it's Street Fighter 2 with 4 new characters.
All new characters, yeah. It's a 24 meg cartridge now. It's not a 16-bit cartridge. It's 24 megs. It's bigger. I need that 6-button joypad, man. I need it. Gotta have it. I mean, I remember that. I remember saving up all my pocket money to get 2 6-button joypads from the Mega Drive to make sure I could properly play Street Fighter. So that was another one of those things where you've got to fight your corner, you've got to prioritize your entertainment and work on what you need.
Bless parents, they just didn't know. So what was your like sort of play pattern when you were growing up then? Were you very much just, follow make up your own stories, or were you following what was going on in the cartoon and the comics?
Yeah, the play stuff when I was growing up, it was almost always my own stories, and what I used to love doing, because again, it's part of the fun of these toys because they were so tactile to me. I loved seeing how they worked. So I always had like a screwdriver, and I would just dismantle my Transformers, and there would always be stories that I would run where they'd get blown up or something would happen, and have Prime with his arm off or Bumblebee with his leg missing, and I would kind of like go through and just take these things apart and have little stories with them, and then by the end of the story, they'd have been repaired, they'd have been fixed, and I would have put them all back together. So that was my go-to, was always kind of like breaking things down but then repairing them, and that was always the stories that came out of me. But the cartoons were never much of an influence because I had obviously the first 3 episodes, everyone saw those, and then the VHS I had Vector Sigma, I had War Dawn because it was on the same tape, had the Return of Optimus Prime, had Rebirth, and there was a couple, one or two things like that, and then some of my friends had Call of the Primitives and a couple of other bits and bobs. But generally speaking, I didn't get to see much of the cartoon. So it was all the comics growing up. And a lot of the times, the comics didn't lead me to kind of make stories that I wanted to read in the comics, because the comics did a good enough job that I was really happy with it. But what the comics taught me was they informed me of how to tell stories. So reading what the comics were doing was giving me ideas of how to set up my own little situations and how to build conflict, and how to put characters, like I'd put Autobots and Decepticons in situations where both parties would be in trouble and they'd have to find ways to work together before the Decepticons would ultimately betray one of the Autobots. And then I'd make these little stories up, and it was always that kind of world building and the concepts of how narratives flow. The comics are teaching me that, which I then used to make up my own little stories and go off and play with. So yeah, it was just great fun looking back at it, and it really kind of got the imagination firing.
One thing I want to pick up on, just what you were saying there about this idea that you were taking the figures apart and then rebuilding them. I suppose even at a very early age, then that means that you had a great sense of the complexity of the Transformers figures over that of, say, a G.I. Joe or a Thundercat toy. Now, I remember growing up playing with the Transformers. The Transformers just transformed. That was just the nature of them. And that was cool, but I never really gave any thought to it like I do now in regards to how it all works. Were you very cognizant of that? I would have imagined you were.
Oh yeah, I loved it, because when I would take these things apart, I'd realize, okay, this has to come apart this way because it goes together this way, and this does this and this does that. And that's when I kind of realized very early on, that some stuff you could easily disassemble. If there was a screw there, you could easily unscrew things and take it apart. But then I realized, well, some stuff wasn't screwed in, some stuff was pinned in. And then I knew then, okay, I can't take the pins apart as easily. So I was realizing then that some bits were glued, some bits weren't. And it was one of those things where you realize how things worked. And the more I found out about how these things worked, the more it got me wanting to experience different ones to see how they worked. And I wanted to see the differences between things. And that's when you start to realize some of the small things, like, for example, when you look at Smokescreen and Prowl, they're very, very similar. But then I realized, oh, hang on, Smokescreen, although it's different colors, obviously, there's remolded bits. So like the front bumper is different. There's these little small bits, and the light bar is there, but not on this one. And the holes where the light bar would go are filled in on this one, and you'd start to realize that even though some of them were the same, they weren't quite the same. I would try and swap out Bumblebee and Cliffjumper's legs to see how if they worked the same. And even though the engineering is the same, they're not quite the same shape here and there. So it doesn't quite fit. And they were almost like puzzles to take apart and put back together. And the more like you find out about them, the more you think, oh, okay, well, if this works this way, then maybe I can work things out a different way. I used to collect loads of Lego at the time, and I would often have these weird Frankenstein transformers where I would take transformers apart, and they would be then augmented with different arms or legs that are made out of Lego. And I would just take Technic Lego, and I would kind of Frankenstein these things together to give like exosuits to the robots and give them bigger arms or change the vehicle modes in certain ways. And it was just a great fun engineering task.
Did you ever take anything apart and were unable to put it back together? Did any Transformers bite the dust at the hand of your magical screwdriver?
Yeah, let's try and think. Well, I know one thing I did do, which did cause me problem, because they were just a little bit more complex, the Power Master toys. I remember distinctly taking apart Power Master Prime, and I took Dreadwind apart, and the Power Master mechanism has got lots of it's got some springs in there and some specific bits, and I realized I hadn't paid attention as to what came apart when, and then I was like, oh, when I put this back together, I've got to put this back together in a very specific way, and that took a bit of thinking because I'd kind of messed that up. So, but I never completely trashed one. I did trash one completely a long, long time later. It was during Armada Energon time. Energon Towline, I want to say. He's the one who looks a bit like Ratchet and Ironhide. He's got a little sled thing. So I bought 2 of that. And the plan was, like a lot of people I thought at the time, customizing, was to make him into Ironhide or Ratchet. So I disassembled that one with a plan to spraying it up and everything. And that's another one of those ones where I took them all apart. But then this one was like later. I didn't have as much time. I lost loads of the screws. I lost some of the bits. And that put the kibosh on that. So I never did finish that repaint. But that would have been when I was like 20, 21. So that doesn't really count. But as a kid, I was much better. I didn't break them completely.
So you were collecting Transformers and have been collecting Transformers your entire life?
Not quite. I had loads as a kid, and then I kind of hit that age of about. Let's see. The first figures were in 1984, so I would have been 5. So when I got to about age 11, 12, I hit that point where I was growing up, and I was like, oh, I don't want to play with toys anymore, and I just sold all my Transformers. I just went to a car boot sale and just got rid of like loads of them, which was, at the time, I was kind of like, well, I'm growing up, I don't need these now. And if I'd have kept them, that would have been great. I didn't have the boxes. They weren't all in great condition. So it wouldn't have been, like great money in or nothing. But I did sell like the lot. And then it was only years later when Armada and Energon and Cybertron came back around. And I was at that point in my early 20s and I had a bit more disposable income. It was like, oh, okay, this is tapping into my brain a little bit here now. And I never enjoyed the Beast stuff at the time. I kind of enjoyed Beast Machines, but it's only years later I actually went and watched Beast Wars and Beast Machines in order. But the Armada stuff came out, and I realized that big chunky Optimus Prime. I was like, oh, that's really good. I really like that. And even though it feels a bit weird going into because I was living in the States, it felt weird going into a Walmart and just picking up a robot for myself as a grown man. At the same time, it was like, it's my money. I'm going to do it. So I bought loads of the Armada guys, and that's what got me back into it. But there was definitely a sort of like a 10-year or a 12-year gap where I was like, no, I'm done with the toy stuff, onto other things. And then life is cyclical, and I've gone full circle back into the toys.
I always say to people, because your story and my story very, very similar. You get to that sort of teenage level, and it's like, right, I want rid of the toys now. I'm growing up, but Armada just hit. And yeah, like I was exactly the same because I was getting my student loan, and
Yeah,
I guarantee you it didn't go on books.
yeah,
And that early 2000s of Armada hitting, you were also getting the Takara box reissues at that
yeah.
point.
I definitely I didn't grab all of those, but I definitely had again. The first one I bought from the reissues was Prowl because I got
Mm.
rid of my Prowl toy, and then
Which I think was one or two. It was Jazz and Prowl were one and two, I believe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And again, it's one of those things about like I've never owned a Jazz toy until recently.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it was like I've never owned Jazz, so I should probably get Jazz. But I love Prowl. So Prowl was my first one almost. So it's like so I just want that one again.
Yeah.
And to this day, like I think pretty much like the only G1 toy I've got left, with the exception of Missing Link Prime, which isn't really G1, but it's
Mm.
G1 adjacent. But the only actual G1 Transformer I've got is still Prowl. And I don't think I've got any of the other ones.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Like, because by the sounds of it, you and I are very similar in terms of our thought process, because most of my collection now is the modern reinterpretations of
Yeah,
classic characters that we love. But the only Generation 1 toys that I have kept, and when I say Generation 1, they're not obviously my toys from my childhood, but they're
yeah,
just representations of it, is 84 Optimus Prime, Power Master Optimus Prime,
mm,
Action Master Optimus Prime,
yeah,
because I had those three as a
yeah.
child, and they each have a sentimental attachment.
Exactly, and it's that thing that keeps you. That's what grounds you to the franchise. Those are your keystones. Those are the ones that everything else is based off of. So yeah.
Now that you're collecting the modern stuff, what is it about this era of Transformers that is making you so happy as a Transformers collector?
Um, it's weird. It's they kind of. I think it's because for a long time, even though I didn't really watch the cartoons and the comics both generally shared the model sheets. So even though they were very different stories, what the comics looked like and what the cartoons looked like were very similar. And I think we've, as fans, for such a long time, we've had versions of characters that are really good, but a lot of the time they don't look as close to the cartoon or the comics as they maybe could have done. So I just remember I mean, pardon the pun, but I remember the shockwaves that rippled through the fandom years and years back when they released, or when they first showed those grey prototype pictures of the Masterpiece Optimus Prime, the very first one. Because that was the first time as fans, I think we'd seen an Optimus Prime figure that looked that accurate to the cartoon. Like, I remember poring over those images thinking, like, where have the wheels gone? They've hidden the wheels. How have they done this? And I think for so long, we've had really good representations of the characters, but they've never quite looked as close to the comics or the cartoons as they have until recently. And the Masterpiece figures were a great way of kind of getting that kind of like fidelity to the show and to the comics. But also, they had a glacial release schedule, and they were crazy expensive. And also, quite inconsistent, because you started off with masterpieces that were a combo of everything. They had a bit of the comic, a bit of the cartoon, a bit of the toy. It was all a bit of a really good mishmash. And then as time went on, it became slavishly to the cartoon, where there had to be no detail in it. It was all very smooth. It was all very, very sleek, and also very, very hard to transform because they were jumping through hoops to get that way. Whereas when I kind of fell into Siege and Earthrise, and to a lesser extent some of the stuff from the Power of the Primes and Titans Returns, they were like, these are close enough. They are, they're not masterpiece level, but they're close enough that it's got the look of the character pretty much there. It's got the silhouette is pretty much there. The feel of it is the character without the price or the complexity of Masterpiece. And that's what I kind of switched over from Masterpiece to the main line, I guess. And that's, I think, like when you see with Earthrise now, you look at Prowl and Blue Streak and Smokescreen, and you look at them and think, right, that's almost like it was in the cartoon. The vibe, the proportions, all that stuff is there, and that
Mm.
that just again it hits that part of the brain that makes me think, yeah, that looks right, that's they keep refining it as well. Like Siege Optimus Prime was really good. You think this looks like it should be. This is the right way for Prime. It's just a shame that he's not an Earth truck.
Mm.
And then Earthrise crops up a year later. And it's like, oh, okay, so you've taken the same basic thing, but now it's an Earth truck. Oh, this is pretty much it. This is pretty much the Prime. I only ever need this one. And then Studio Series comes out, which I picked up, which I had bought for me for Christmas. And it's like, man, this is
That's it. Yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't need another one. This is what it should be,
Mm.
And so I think that's what's kind of got me turned back onto collecting them, is getting figures that look like the guys I used to love reading about or watching, and getting them in such a good format that's affordable, but still has enough of the figure that it looks like it should look. And we've been spoiled on the comic front this year to get stuff like Flame and Straxus, and before that we had Jaxus as well. To get those guys so comic-y in plastic form, that's another one that's kind of ticked a box in my brain. Like, yep, that's what we need. That's great. So, yeah, that's the big joy there.
Masterpiece has always been a funny one for me, which is that, much like yourself, when it first came on the scene, it was a revolution. That first Masterpiece Optimus Prime, and arguably most of the Masterpiece figures have been. It's funny that you mentioned there about them going a bit off, because I remember when they did the first Masterpiece Starscream, and they did it in that weird green, and you were like, but that's not Starscream. Why? Like, you're being so slavish to Optimus Prime.
Yeah.
And yet when you're coming to do Starscream now, it's completely different. But my question for you with Masterpiece is this: with the complexity of a Masterpiece toy, do you find any joy in them? Because I never did.
There were moments, like I always found, like say again, like Prowl and Wheeljack they were a really good sweet spot where they were just complex enough to match the cartoon stylings, but be great looking cars and a reasonably fun kind of transformation. I thought that Masterpiece Inferno and Grapple were fantastic because they were the ones where there was a really chunky robot, and I found those great fun to transform because that had that. It still floors me. Is the way that the crane and the ladder disappear into the torso. That is actual witchcraft. Possibly, that makes me believe an extra dimensional kind of. That's where Prime's trailer goes. It goes into Inferno's chest, because how does that ladder do that? It's just absolutely stunning. And then on the flip side, I've got Masterpiece Megatron, and I've never, ever transformed him. I started to, and I got like 2 or 3 steps in, and I was like, I'm going to break this thing.
Are we talking about the first Masterpiece or the second Masterpiece?
Oh, the second one. I did transform the first one, and that wasn't particularly fun because it's all levers and all panels and all kind of thing. But then the second one, the more cartoon accurate one, that's where my brain was like, well, I'd like knowing it can transform, but I will never, ever transform this thing. It's just too much for me. It's like, I'm gonna break it, and I can't do it.
I always feel that if you're forced to sit down and stare at an instruction booklet for a transformer, you've lost the point of it a little bit. If I ever get stuck with a transformation on any toy, whether it be a Masterpiece or a current toy that you can buy in the shop, the most that I am prepared to accept when struggling to figure out how to transform it is just looking at the alt mode on the box.
Yeah, trying to work out where things should be. It's like, well,
yes.
to get to here, there's got to be a way to kind of pull that there, to go under there. And,
because going back to what you said a little while ago, when you were a kid, part of the fun was figuring it out. And I still think that as an adult now. But there are certainly some toys, and I would even put Studio Series 86 Optimus Prime here in this category, where unfortunately in the desire to be slavish to the design,
Yeah,
you can sometimes overcomplicate it a little bit. It's
definitely.
funny that you mentioned Earthrise Optimus Prime there, because that is, for me, I still think, perhaps one of, if not the best Optimus Prime toys that has ever been made.
Oh,
And
unquestionably, it's just great.
and and, and I remember like vividly, and I don't recall a great deal of like the first time ever, but I remember the first time transforming that from truck to robot, and
Mm.
there was this moment where I was holding it in my hand as I was transforming it, and the bit where effectively its entire torso sort of like explodes outwards,
Yeah,
you
and then
know, and
the
it
bumper flips in, the grill flips in, and it all goes behind the matrix chamber. Dunk, dunk, dunk.
yeah, and I just vividly remember stopping what I was doing and just going,
Wow.
wow.
Yeah,
And you
I
just
love.
have this endorphin hit where you're
Yeah,
like, oh, yes.
exactly. And I think that's something that I just love. And again, it's something that that's something I've definitely enjoyed so much in recent years with so many of the newer figures that have pulled that off. Masterpiece. Studio Series 86 Ultra Magnus, another one to me that is just when you make that into the car carrier and the truck and the cab and the trailer, it's still separate, but they all combined form one thing. The way that slings itself together is like, oh, this is just ah, just brilliant. And the first Studio Series 86 Hot Rod, that is phenomenal because it looks like it's walked off the screen. It doesn't have a huge backpack on him. The car mode, yeah, it's not quite as good as the Masterpiece is, but to get from that robot to that car in a toy that's this big, it, and it does it just absolutely brilliantly. That kind of stuff, I just think it lights up little parts of my brain in a way that's just kind of just that's what I want. That's why I play with these things. It's just great.
Much like what you were saying there about the Inferno and Grapple, just having everything fold in. Yeah, the fact that that Studio Series Hot Rod has just such a clean robot silhouette
Yeah,
is
it's
just incredible. Yeah.
yeah, and the same thing with like the Kingdom Rodimus Prime. Again, that's not slavishly cartoon accurate, but
Mm.
that to me is like my go-to version of Rodimus because
Mm.
it combines a lot of the kind of stuff I loved about the original toy with a lot of the look of the cartoon, and it's
Mhm.
got its own sleekness to it, and it feels like an evolution of the Studio Series 86 Hot Rod, and it's just again one of those ones that just makes me happy to kind of fiddle about with it. It's just the right level of complexity that it's not too complex, but it's not do it simply. That it just hits that right spot. So yeah.
Like what has blown you away in the last couple of years?
Let's have a look. I'm just looking at my cabinet now, which you can't see, but I guarantee is here.
He
Um,
has toys, trust me, everybody.
I
They
do.
are there.
So I'm thinking there's been a couple that have really kind of made me go that is clever, or that is clean, or that is perfect. So I remember getting Siege when Siege Jetfire rocked up. That was one where I was like, "Whoa, that's good," because it's big, it's imposing. It's got the cool hand things where you close the fists and the 5 mil holes pop up so you can hold guns. I thought that was really clever. Um, there's just loads of the recent crop. Origins, is it Origins? Yeah, Origins Jazz and Origins Wheeljack and Origins Bumblebee. All three of those guys. That one is like this is the cartoon. This is what I wanted 40 years ago. And the fact that you can put Bumblebee into Wheeljack's van mode thing, oh, that to me that is so clever. And the fact that they're still fun to play with and they don't blow your mind trying to transform them, just absolutely brilliant. So those ones definitely have hit home. I'm not a big fan of the Dinobots at all. I like Swoop, but I'm not really a fan of them as characters. But that said, I did have to get all the 86 Dinobots because they just look so good. And when you get those
Yes.
grouped together, that's another one where it's like, right, I'm not a big fan of these guys, but just to see them like that, it's like, oh, that's great. And pretty much in the last couple of years, another thing that's also blown me away is just anytime we get a comic character in plastic form. So
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved Impactor. And I remember begging Nick Roach when he was doing Last Stand of the Wreckers. I said, "You're not going to kill Impactor, are you? Don't kill Impactor. He's died before. He's died twice before. Don't kill Impactor." And he was like, "Oh, I don't know. You know, I might do it. We'll see what happens." And I remember saying, "Don't kill him. Don't kill him." So when we got an actual Impactor toy, it's like, "Oh, this is great." And now we've got Zaran and Straxus and Flame, and it's like, oh, just that's been the big kind of like, yeah, that's fantastic. More of that, please.
Just because we mentioned it earlier on, the new Commander class Armada Optimus Prime is just wonderful.
Yeah, I think
Like,
having that trailer, but having to, and I know it's lost the auto transforming thing, but the auto transforming thing was fun the first two times.
hmm.
But when a transformer auto transforms, it's like, well, I want to play with it. I don't want it to play with it, for me. I want to do it. So that Armada Optimus Prime, God, that's quality. And you can feel the heft on that thing, and
Yeah.
it's so posable, and it just looks great. Yeah.
I had a moment with Armada Optimus Prime, which was when I bought it
Mm.
when it came out over here in the UK, and I remember getting it from Phoenix and got home, started playing with it. I thought it was a great toy, was deep into the Armada stuff,
Yeah.
and it must have been a good, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years before I got told that it could auto transform.
Really?
I was just like, is that a thing? So
Yeah.
for me, when it was obvious that they were going to take away the auto transforming feature, I was like, well, mine never had it anyway.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because again, I didn't care about reading the instructions or the boxes or anything like that. It was just
Yeah.
like, let's get the toy out, let's play with the toy, and let's see.
Yeah. Oh man, you missed out because it was fun watching that auto transform the first couple of times, but yeah, it was once it was done, it was like, oh, well, that's done now. So to get this new one where it's fully posable and it's all great and chunky and just slots together, it's easily out of the Armada redos that have happened in the last 2 or 3 years. That Optimus Prime one is easily to me like the best one. I've really enjoyed all the other ones as fun representations of the characters. But oddly enough, out of all the new toys I've got, because the original toys looked reasonably close to how they looked in the show and were great fun, I'm not having as much fun with the Armada ones simply because they're so feature stripped for the expense, at the expense of articulation. So I really enjoy them, but there's a part of my head going, yeah, these are good representations of the characters, but they're not as fun as the original toys. Whereas with so many of these G1 updates, it's like, right, here's your original toys, but better. And Armada's doesn't quite scratch that itch because the original toys were already so good. So it's nice to get them updated and back in people's eyes again, but yeah, that's the one kind of swing and a miss of the recent lot that I've been like, well, they're good. I'm glad they're here, but they're not my focus. The updated G1 stuff is what really is pulled me right back into it.
It's an interesting thing because you have talked about your affinity for the toys and growing up with them and taking them apart and really getting into the ins and outs of it. Whereas I have always considered Transformers toys to be nothing more than a physical representation of a character that I really like.
Mm.
Like, if a toy is not intuitive and doesn't transform easily and things like that, I am quite happy to just put that on a shelf, much like you mentioned with your masterpiece Megatron,
Yeah.
and never touch it. A recent example of that would be the Commander class Magmatron. I
Mm.
started messing around with it, came out of its box in robot mode, started messing around with it, and kind of realized that I had no real interest in Magmatron being anything other than Magmatron. And so he has maintained his robot mode ever since he came out the box, and I've never bothered to look to try and transform him. So it's kind of interesting to hear a different perspective on the toys themselves. And so I think from my point of view, even though I can 100% agree that, let's take Armada Megatron, for example. Armada Megatron versus the the remake of Armada Megatron that we got recently. You know, it is missing the Minicon. It is missing all of the Minicon gimmicks. It's missing
Yeah.
the cage on his leg. It's missing the firing missiles, the
The knife in the hand.
electrics, the knife hand. It's missing all of that. And yet, I would quite happily buy that new one and be like, this is a perfect representation now for me
Yeah.
of that. I think it's handy that I parted ways with all of my Armada toys like a good few years ago. So I don't necessarily feel when I'm buying the new toys that I'm missing out, because to me, all of that superfluous stuff, which was designed for children, was never really an appeal for me anyway.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I'm certainly the same way with the Armada stuff, where I'd sold off a lot of mine. So getting these new guys, again, I like having that representation of the character. That it's like I've got that Armada Megatron. That's great. And I think if I kept my Armada stuff, I don't think I'd have bought these new ones because I already had that character. But so to go back and get them now that I've got rid of the stuff, it's nice to have that again. But again, the kind of the little idiot inside of me is also going, but I do like it when it goes pew 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 and that kind of thing. So,
and I totally understand that, because I'm exactly the same. I mean, one of the things that I never parted with was my entire animated collection, and I have not bought any of the new animated toys because I just don't need them. The one that I've always been tempted with, just because of size and scale, is possibly the Bumblebee, because I often think that Bumblebee toy is a little weak, the original animated one, that is, even though it's much more closely linked in terms of aesthetic to the rest of the line. And I think the other issue that you have, especially with the toys now, is going in knowing that you're never going to be able to complete that line. One of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to with Armada, and part of the reason that I bought them, is because when I think of Transformers Armada and I think of the Autobots, I think of Optimus Prime, Hotshot, and Red Alert.
Yeah, those are your big three,
Yeah, and if I can get those three, that's fine. When it comes to the Decepticons, we've obviously got Megatron.
Yeah,
I didn't bother with Tidal Wave because I don't have room for another Titan in my house. And to me as well, Tidal Wave was never a Titan. Like,
he was a big guy, but he was not this behemoth,
Yes, exactly. So I have Megatron, I have Starscream, and for me, like, I would absolutely adore a Demolisher or a Cyclonus, and that would be it. I'm quite happy.
Give on those two definitely, because then I think you've got your core cast then, and that's one thing I've definitely enjoyed doing, not even with Armada, but also with the G1 guys. I've really enjoyed over the last couple of weeks putting together my displays and getting together my core groups of things, because it's so hard to collect everything. You just can't do it. But I know with my setting up of things again now, I've got like my core group of 84 Autobots, and I've got like a core group of 85 Autobots, and I've got things where like I've got like Runabout and Runamuck together. I've got characters who are wreckers, they're all together. You've got your groups of Dinobots together. So getting those little subgroups and trying to complete those, that's another little thing that I think with the most recent lot, it's been really good fun to kind of pull that together and try and collect those things and get that kind of grouping. Because that's another thing that just, it's nice to see finally a completion of a set, Like at the moment I was really happy to get the 3 Insecticons, to get those 3 together. It's like, great. But then I fell down the rabbit hole of, I've got these guys, I might as well get the deluxe ones as well. Because they are really clever remolds, and I like the way they've approached them. And so now it's like, I'm just missing Venom, and he's supposed to be coming out some point this year or next year. So it's like, once I get that Venom figure, however that's going to look, that will complete my Insecticons, And it's like getting those little tick boxes in your head. I've got the imaginary catalog in my brain where you can see, that'll tick, 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 that one. So
I cannot tell you how many years I have suffered begging for Sure Shot just to be able to complete those Autobot Target Masters, man.
I know, I've got Crosshairs and Point Blank right there. The right there.
And what gets me most about Sure Shot is the fact that we have been sat on a complete set of Decepticon Headmasters and Target Masters for so many years now.
Yeah. Since what? Titans Returns gave us all of them, I think. And That was what, 10 years ago?
Let's have a look. Titans Return would be about 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
which is
Combiner
crazy.
Wars. No, Combiner Wars would be about 10 years ago. So you'd be looking at like 8 or 9 years, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still absolutely mind blowing to think that we got those guys. Why do you hate Sure Shot, Hasbro? What is going on?
and and we've gone to the point now where we've moved past where we were 8 or 9 years ago, where you would get the Titan Master, the companion, things like that. We've now gotten to the point where, I mean, Crosshairs came out, and yes, he was just a remold of Ironhide, but it was great that mold was so absolutely
Yeah,
fantastic.
it really ticked. It did enough of a job that you buy it as Crosshairs.
And because we've had so many other and different Ironhides and Ratchets subsequently, that's the only one of that mold where you're like, yeah, that's fine, that's Crosshairs now for me.
Totally
But
works.
but Sure Shot, I don't know. I just don't understand what the problem is with poor Sure Shot.
Yeah, I know. And I've even future proofed myself. I've got it ready because I I had a Siege Battle Master ready for Crosshairs, so he's got a Target Master. Point Blank comes with a little Target Master, but to be fair, he's quite rubbish. So I've given him another Siege Battle Master, and I've got a third Battle Master ready, that's waiting for Sure Shot to kind of claim ownership of him. So just come on.
I appreciate the fact that you did that, and I really do appreciate that you went, yeah, I'm just going to get a Battle Master, as opposed to me, who went ahead and actually bought that Megatron box set just to be able to get Pinpointer. No, it wasn't Pinpointer. Who was it? What was Crosshairs' Target Master?
I honestly, I can't remember the names of any of the Target Masters apart
Yeah.
from Firebolt because he was Hot Rods. I remember him. Oh, and I remember Nightstick and Fracas. So I remember those
Yes.
guys. But yeah, the other,
Peacemaker.
which one?
Peacemaker, I
Peacemaker.
think.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. Because I just remember that bit in the reboot. They call me Peacemaker, and it's like, wow, you only had one line in this entire cartoon,
Yeah.
and you nailed that line.
His first name is Colt. So,
Exactly.
but yeah, so I'm not too slavish about, as long as they've got a Target Master, I'm happy with that. So it's like that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Has there been any toy recently that you have purchased that has had the exact opposite impact on you? One that, for whatever reason, it just has not sat well with you?
Trying to think. Let's have a look. Let's see what.
Because the only one that I would suggest while you're thinking about that,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people will understand where this comes from, is the one toy that I have had ownership of in recent years has been the HasLab Unicron. And
Oh,
much like Unicron sucking up planets, that sucks joy out of every facet of your being.
but it was so expensive. I knew that was never a possibility for me. It was too expensive and too big. It's like, no, I know I can't do that. So that's not an issue. So I've never. I've actually got my. Where's it gone? This is pretty much the only Unicron toy I think I'm ever going to need. So, I've got the little Super 7 or reaction figure a little bit, so that covers all my prototype Unicron needs.
With the exception of one toy, I got rid of all of my Armada stuff, but I will never part with my Armada Unicron.
No, I've got him still. He's up in the attic. It's like that one. That's a keeper.
Just the best Unicron that you will ever need.
Yeah, the one and only. That's another one that just hits all the right notes, and even though it looks a little different to the G1 one, but it's still Unicron, and it still does what it says on the tin. So that's cracking.
Yes.
But yeah, but thinking of a toy that's given me like the direct opposite thing. I don't know. I think I've become quite discerning in realizing like I don't need to get absolutely everything. So if I do pick up something, it's usually because it's specifically finishing off like a set of things I need, or it's something I want. So like you mentioned Magmatron, I know that I've got no a sort of like affinity for that particular character. I've never really known much about him or what he does. So to me, I can look at that one and go, well, you know what? I don't need that one. So off it goes, I'm just trying to think now, like looking at these now, like I've not ordered the Superion redos because I look at it and think, well, it'd be nice to have, but it doesn't really work for me, I guess. So I know that I don't need that one. Looking back on these ones, usually like I've picked up double sets of things. So like I picked up what were they called? It was like the Walmart exclusive ones. It had like Ruckus and Crankcase, and there was Ruckus came with Bludgeon, the IDW Bludgeon. So I bought that to get Ruckus, but I don't need that IDW Bludgeon, even though it's a great mold and it's a great toy. I don't need it, so that's one of those ones I can like sell off or give to Toy Foo or something like that. But yeah, all the ones I've currently got now, they all none of them really annoy me or rub me up the wrong way. They usually even like the least light stuff I've got, I still really like. So like Earthrise Double Dealer, for example, he's one of those ones where he's a bit fiddly and he's a bit finicky and he tries to do a bit too much stuff, but he's a big imposing guy and I really enjoy that. And then the Earthrise Seeker molds, they lack waist swivels, they lack wrist swivels, but they still look great and they still do the job. So I guess Earthrise Megatron, another one of those ones where he feels a bit of a half-hearted effort. But I know that in a couple of months' time, we'll have a Studio Series Megatron that's going to probably scratch that itch. So yeah, there's nothing really I've got that I'm not happy with, apart from like older toys. Like for some stupid reason, I still own Alternator Grimlock and Alternator Wheeljack. And
a figure which cannot be transformed without parts falling off, especially those doors.
It's basically sadism. It's just horrible. It's a horrible toy. The vehicle mode looks fantastic. And
there were toys, especially around that alternator, where it was less a case of being able to transform it and more a case of popping the parts off to then get most of it and then popping the rest of the parts back on.
Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare. And there's still bits like I love Studio Series Ironhide and Ratchet. I love having those guys. The vehicle modes are great. The van modes are great. They're a pain to transform because especially like the windshield bit, it really is a really unpleasant experience. And Studio Series Optimus Prime, he's fantastic. But when you first have to turn the head around in robot mode, that is so tight on my copy. It's like I'm going to break this thing. So
I took a file to mine.
Yeah, I'm tempted to do the same to mine because it's properly like we're going to break this. Yeah. So yeah, overall, I think my current collection is all very much stuff that I actively want, and yeah, so because it's kind of it's what Graham Thompson does when he says he's got his curated collection. I love that. So mine is curated as well, but it's just a bit more broad. But yeah, it's very much geared to what makes me happy now, and this makes me happy.
Yeah, because at the moment that it stops making you happy, stop it.
Yeah, and I kind of realize that because like that the thing now it's like with the combiners. Yeah, at some point I might get a Unite Warriors second-hand Superion because I think they'll start to dip in price now when the new one comes out. I'm not a fan of the whole skeleton frame setup and that silver bolt with all the extra gumph on the jet mode looks like a frying pan, and it's like I don't know. But there's also then the flip side of that. There's a part of my brain that goes, well, you've got Alpha Trion, you've got all your War Dawn guys. You probably should get, you've got your Menasor. You should probably get because the cartoon had it. So,
I'm dealing with this existential crisis that's going on at the minute, which is that I want the new Devastator set. I want the new Constructicons.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that I want them is because the Combiner Wars Constructicons, as good as they were for the time, they're just woefully out of scale in terms of just being...
They are massive, yeah.
They're just huge. But because I'm a fan of characters, I'm not often a fan of having combiner teams in a combined mode because they're individual characters.
Yeah.
But there's a part of me is like, oh, well, I can get rid of my Combiner Wars Devastator now because I'm
You
going to
wouldn't,
get
would
the
you?
new ones.
He would be in Devastator mode, and you'd have the individuals alongside him.
You see, you know where I'm going with this. So I'm like,
I've
do
wrestled with this myself.
I part with him, or not? Because again, he's a big boy. He's a Titan figure,
Yeah,
effectively. So yeah, like I probably will. It'll probably end up going to Toy-Fu, but there is just a part of my brain that's doing that. But Kris, it's been absolutely wonderful talking about toys with you, but I am very conscious of the time, and I'm also conscious that one of the things that I want to do with this show is to talk a little bit about something else that my guests are passionate about. And so I will ask people to give me something that is besides Transformers.
mm,
And you wanted to bring up a show which I used to be a massive fan of when I was very, very young,
back in the
uh,
day. Back
back
in
in the day, but have really lost touch with, and that's Red Dwarf. So, for the benefit of anybody who might not know what Red Dwarf is, do you want to give people a little overview of Red Dwarf?
Yeah. So Red Dwarf is a BBC Two, or at least it started on BBC Two, a BBC Two sitcom that started in 1988, and it ran on the BBC for like 8 series, and it's the story of the last human being alive. So the last human being alive is a man called David Lister. He works on a spaceship which is called Red Dwarf, and he's the lowest ranking member of the spaceship, and he works for his bunkmate Arnold Rimmer, and the two of them hate each other. There's a massive accident on the ship, and everybody on the ship is wiped out except for Lister. The ship ends up being 3 million years from Earth, and then it's all about Lister trying to get home. He's got a hologram of Rimmer, who's now dead. They've got a highly evolved cat that also kind of lives with them on the ship. And later on, they get an android called Crichton, who also kind of joins them on their adventures. And it's one of those shows where as you grow up, you'll watch certain shows, and like somebody will recommend to you a particular show, and you'll watch it, and for whatever reason, it hits you at just the right time, just the right kind of space, that it becomes like a foundational part of who you are as you're growing up. And for me, Red Dwarf it hit me at that exact point. And it's one of those things where some people get into Star Trek massively, some people get into Star Wars massively. For me, it was Red Dwarf because it had all the sci-fi trappings, but with a really kind of cynical comic edge to it as well. And that comedy sci-fi thing is what really, really got into my brain and said, yeah, this is what makes you laugh. Do more of this. So yeah, that's Red Dwarf in broad terms.
And if you're listening to this as a Transformers fan and you're thinking to yourself, that sounds an awful lot like More Than Meets the Eye. Yes, it does.
Yeah, James Roberts. He and I definitely share the same level of love and appreciation for Red Dwarf. We've talked about it at length. Every TF Nation, when we kind of like catch up, we always kind of set aside quarter of an hour and go, right, let's talk Red Dwarf, and then we'll just kind of talk about Red Dwarf. But Lost Light, More Than Meets the Eye, all that very much heavily wears its Red Dwarf influence on its sleeve, and it's the kind of thing where the way that show was written, I first started, Red Dwarf started in 88. I didn't start watching it until the following year. So I started watching it in 89 when I would have been like 10. And so Red Dwarf finished on the BBC when I would have been, I think, 17 or 18. So in that kind of 8-year period, that's where that show taught me so much about writing and plotting and character and comedy, because that's the show that kind of made me realize, oh, I love telling stories and they can be like this, and it just kind of was so educational to me in terms of how comedy happens and how television is made and how television stories are written and produced. And even though I was big into the Transformers comics, and I've written loads of my own kind of comics, me and my friends did a sci-fi comedy called Loose Cannon, and Loose Cannon is very, very Red Dwarf influenced. Even in writing that, I never write my comics the way people would generally write comics, because comics, maybe not so much nowadays, but they used to be like 22 pages. And sitcoms in the US, at least, and on ITV and Channel 4, used to be 22 minutes. So you got a 22-minute show and a 22-page comic. So my writing for any kind of comic I was doing was to treat the comic like a TV show. And you can see James Roberts does almost the exact same thing. You've got like 22 minutes, 22 pages, and they match up perfectly. And getting that kind of like structure and applying one medium to another, it's one of those things where, as much as I love the Red Dwarf show itself, part of the reason I love it so much is because it taught me so much about creating and writing and comedy. So it's really kind of like just cemented itself in my head.
And I think it's important for people to understand, especially if there's any young listeners out there who weren't familiar with Red Dwarf, the fact that you mentioned that it ran for about 8 years and then it took a hiatus, and it is still now still producing new content. I can't remember the last time it had a new series, but it's been relatively recent. But one of the things that always used to stand out for me about that show was how they could take sci-fi tropes that you would see in Star Trek or shows like that and be able to bend the comedy.
Yeah.
There's the classic episode where they go to the backwards Earth.
Yes, that was the first one I ever saw. That's what kind of got me.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
Show, yeah.
Which is brilliant because they are able to work forward in time, but everything else is happening backwards. And it's so brilliant when you realize that fundamentally there's a bar fight that's about to happen in reverse.
That's the kind of thing. I think if Star Trek: The Next Generation, if they had encountered a backwards reality, there would have been some kind of big, deep philosophical approach to it. There would have been something that would have, it would have been a great thing about, I don't know, about the finite nature of being, but going backwards. There would have been some deep discussion about it. Whereas Red Dwarf uses it to have a backwards bar fight and look at the comedy in that as people get unthrown through windows, or chairs get unbroken over people's heads. So it's taking a really kind of a potentially really deep concept and just flipping it on its head and having fun with it and just doing silly things. Yeah. So love it. So it's so good. And you mentioned that it's still in production, because that's one of those weird things where the way I fell off Transformers for a long time, I fell off Red Dwarf for a fair bit, but they've always seemed alternated. So when I was selling off my Transformers or getting out of Transformers was when I was getting into Red Dwarf. And then by the time I got to like 1999, 2000, that's when Red Dwarf stopped on the BBC. And that's when I moved to America and got into Armada and Energon and Cybertron. So as one of my fandom things kind of like waned, something else would fill the gap, and over the years, as I fall away from Transformers for a little bit, I go back into Red Dwarf in more depth for a little bit, and I just waver between the two. So that's partially why I really enjoyed More Than Meets the Eye so much, was because it felt like this really weird spiritual amalgamation of the two, and I'd love to see James have a crack at writing some actual Red Dwarf. That'd be great fun to see. I don't know if I doubt it would happen, but if it ever did, that'd be something. That'd be something to watch.
Well, I want to thank you, Kris, for taking an hour out of your day to come and chat with me. It has been absolutely wonderful and will hopefully be the first of many conversations for you and I to come. So thank you very much. This is the point of the show where I turn it over to you and give you the platform to point people in directions of the social medias and things like that where they can find you.
Direction-wise, it's probably only really one at the moment. So I've got my little blog. So it's kriscarter.co.uk. Just remember, you can probably tell from the program description and everything, it's KRIS, not CHRIS. But kriscarter.co.uk. That's my little blog. That's got links to various social media things. I'm not massively active on social media at the moment. I do make the occasional YouTube video where I modify Transformers, but again, because I've not had my Transformers around me properly, I've not been able to do much. But I am hoping to try and get a bit more into that now that I've actually got them here. I own 3 Siege Impactors, so I'm hopefully going to get one that I'm going to hit with an axe and make it into a zombie impactor and just basically trash this thing and make it proper zombie-like in the comics. So that's probably going to be one of the ones I want to try and do. But yeah, chriscarter.co.uk. That's my little blog and links to other things I do, so you can catch me on there. And yeah, that's pretty much my online presence.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you again for joining me. Thank you all very much for listening. Say goodbye, Kris.
Goodbye, Kris.
And we will catch you all next time. Bye.
Bye.